morning we are focused upon Memorial Day, and fortunately my sermon and what we just read, especially in Acts, really fits in with Memorial Day. Now I know many of you are veterans, and I want to say thank you for being a veteran. But we want to think about that honoring of the sacrifice that you made, and then especially those who have fought for our country in past. We're honoring them today. But we want to honor sacrifice for those who really give us the opportunity to have the faith and the freedom that we do today. Now, many of you already know the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Now, I think a lot of people get it confused that this is really just like Veterans Day. The difference with Memorial Day is in just the very fact this is for people who have fought for our country, sacrificed their lives, and have passed away. And we're thankful for them. But we're also thankful for Veterans Day. So you can see the difference between the two. This is a very solemn day of remembrance. And at the very end of our service, we're going to do something very special to honor them. But that's why this ended up being a very solemn service. I do invite you to talk to the graduates afterwards. But please make sure you understand why we have Memorial Day. And I don't know if you knew that originally that was called Decoration Day. It goes back to the Civil War period. Now, also in Veterans Day, we normally celebrate that on November 11th, so that'll be coming up. But that was actually called Armistice Day a long time ago. But I just wanted to share the differences between the two. We do celebrate Memorial Day, and many of you are going to have special times. I don't know if you'll do barbecues, go hiking, camping, whatever you end up doing this weekend. But please consider what Memorial Day is all about. Because to me, it's heeding a call to sacrifice. Whether you are a veteran or whether or it's someone who has passed, there are many people that have heeded the call to service. And I'm very thankful for that. Matthew, I know you're going to the Coast Guard. That's also a call to service. Thank you for that. Appreciate all that you're doing there. Now, I'm going to talk about just a few people that actually had honored the call to sacrifice and had a big impact in history. And I want you to think about the impact that they had, all because of their willingness to even sacrifice. I don't know how many of you ever heard of Alvin C. York. He's a great hero that we have. Now, this man grew up in the church. He grew up in a Church of Christ, and the church that he grew up in, they were conscientious objectors. Now, I don't know if you've known that. I had some family members that I had when I was growing up. They were also conscientious objectors to fighting in wars. Because as a conscientious objector, you are against war itself. You do not want to fight for that. He grew up that way as a conscientious objector, only to change. But then what do you do when you get drafted? This was a very difficult thing for him to have to deal with, but he did. And he is an amazing man because he inspired victory for his troops around him. He boosted morale for those who were around him. He also was highly decorated. The thing that I love about him is he grew up as a poor farmer, but he single-handedly, he captured 132 prisoners in a German war. So they were pinned down. There was this German gun nest, and this was back in October of 1918. They were trying to fight the Germans, and they were overwhelmed. In fact, they were losing soldiers, and it looked like the battle would be lost. He single-handedly changed all this. He grew up as a Christian. He didn't believe in it, but now he's fighting, and he's fighting for his country, and he's fighting for his fellow soldiers. He was such a sharpshooter, he took out 25 enemy soldiers. 25, all by himself. It got to the point where he kept hitting them so good that the other side, the Germans, started thinking that they were being overwhelmed by one man. So he was able, because of that, how was he able to capture 132 prisoners? Well, he took out these 25 enemy soldiers, and then he was able to because they felt overwhelmed, then they surrendered. They were able then to capture these other 132 German soldiers and take them away. Amazing. He single-handedly did that. And all because he was willing to step forth and he was willing to not give up, and he took the sacrifice upon himself and he made a huge difference. And because of that, he's received the Medal of Honor. He was recognized by President Wilson and President Coolidge. He died at the age of 76. But what an incredible, incredible man to be able to actually do that, coming from a conscientious objector status to the point that he was willing to fight for the freedoms that we have, and it inspired World War I to actually end earlier. So you think about World War I, how did that end? He actually, because of what he did, that actually helped push the end of World War I. One of many factors. So that was Alvin C. York, and he went from pacifist to a war hero, and what an amazing, amazing man. So he's someone that I think of that really understood sacrifice. Now there's another man that many of you have heard of, is Pat Tillman. This happened back in 2004. Probably many of you are aware of him. But this was a man who went to Arizona State University. And he was also an Arizona Cardinal with the NFL. He actually went to the NFL, had a really good talent to be able to play. And then he actually had a $3.6 million contract that was laying on the table for him. This happened right after September 11th. And he felt the need to go and fight for our country after September 11th happened. He gave up the $3.6 million contract, which was fairly big at that time. And he did that in order that he might serve our country. And he went to the Army. Both actually were in the Army, as well as Alvin C. Cook. But then he was killed in Afghanistan. So he went out there. It turned out, originally they were saying, well, look, this man got fought for our country and he died. It turned out that it was friendly fire that hit him, and it wasn't the enemy that got him. But he passed away. But one thing that was good about this is because Pat Tillman, because of his life and because his sacrifice, he was able to change things, even the military. There's now a lot more transparency because of this. And sometimes the military does need transparency. It's very important, and some of you know about this as well. But he's really left a legacy of honor and sacrifice. And I think a lot of young men have been inspired to go in the military just because of Pat Tillman. But look at that call to sacrifice. But he heard that internal calling to be out there in the military. Now, Pat Tillman didn't have to go, but he chose to. No matter what, whether you're Alvin C. Cook where you got drafted, he still had to take action upon the calling that was upon him. Pat Tillman had a calling, and he took action upon himself as well to be in the military. So today's passage, we're dealing with Acts chapter 16, verses 9 through 15, that Tyler just read. And we're going to look at the Apostle Paul, and he heeded a call. There was a call that he received also that would also end in sacrifice on his behalf. And so if you would, take your Bibles and look at Acts chapter 16, and we'll look at this together. I'll also have it up on the screen. Starting out in Acts 16, 9, and 10, I want you to think about the calling that he had. It says, during the night, Paul had this vision. A vision of a man from Macedonia standing and begging him, please come over to Macedonia, help us. Paul was obviously moved by that, and it keeps going on here in verse 10. It says, after Paul had seen that vision of this man from Macedonia, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that it was God that had called us to preach the gospel to them. So this was not just from Paul's just perception. He felt that this was God calling him. And what I love about this is, look at it, says, we got ready at once. A calling came from God, and he moved and he acted upon it. Now, it was a lot of sacrifice for Paul to go there, and I'm going to explain why this was such sacrifice. Because this is going to change his plans. This would actually move him out of his comfort zone and out of certainty. This was a greater purpose that Paul had in mind. So moving on here, I need to show you maps. I'm a big map guy. For those of you who are maybe new with us, I do a lot with maps. And I feel like you can learn a lot through maps, because this was highly significant. Because Fellowship of Christ, our church today, has a tie that goes all the way back to this Macedonian move that Paul had, this vision that he received. We can trace our roots back to that, and I'm going to share with you why that is. So it goes on in Acts 16, 11, 12 to say, from Troas is where he had his vision, we put out to sea, so they sailed, got a boat, they went straight for Samothrace, and then the next day we went on to Neapolis. So you can kind of see Troas down there lower, and then they went up to the area called Philippi and the Macedonian region. So I'm going to show that to you more in a second. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony, and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there for several days. Now here's a big picture of this. So this is all of Acts chapter 16 here. I want you to have a good picture of what's happening here. We find that Paul met Timothy at Lystra on this second missionary journey. So Lystra, if you look down on the lower part of the map, that's where he started out at. He met Timothy, and then Timothy ended up following Paul. And the goal that Paul had was to go to Bithynia and Phrygia and Mysia. That's where his plans were to go. But if you look at Acts 16, it says, for whatever reason, God wouldn't let him go there. He was trying to go there. Now, have you ever had that happen before where you've got plans and God's got a different plan in mind? That's happened to me many times. So just a few years ago, when I was trying to do some work in real estate, my goal was actually to do a ministry. I was trying to do affordable housing for people. So I worked very hard in real estate trying to make that happen. I tried for 3-4 years to try to make that go. And I could not make it go. I don't know what it was, that God just kept closing the door, and I actually have to attribute that to God. God didn't want me there, because God wanted me here at the Fellowship of Christ. Amazing how God completely changed where I was going. He said, no, just like Paul, Bithynia is not where I want you up in Macedonia. So I got a call. I got a call from Pastor Tyler Hufford. And Pastor Tyler Hufford now, but at that time he was a part of a life group with us in Tri-Lakes United Methodist. And he calls me up because Bob and Jerry Metcalf said, see if Pastor Stephen will want to become a pastor again. And you know what my first answer was? No way. I do not want to be a pastor. Who wants to be a pastor? I had been there before. I had done that. And I said no. That was my first answer to Tyler. Thank you. Please tell the Metcalfs no, and this is not the time for me. Well, Bob and Jerry called Tyler again and said, would you please ask him to reconsider? And you know what I did? I listened to it a second time, and all of a sudden my heart changed. A little bit like John Wesley, my heart was strangely warmed. And all of a sudden, instead of going the direction I was going, all of a sudden I felt like I need to be here. It was almost a 180-degree turn. How can I go from so much against it to so much for it? Paul had the same thing. He said he was trying to go here. He had his plans for Bithynia, but God said, no, I want you in Macedonia. And this was very significant. And by the way, I had to throw this in there. Greece is the word. Greece is the word. That's where Macedonia, if you want to know where Macedonia is, it's in Greece. If you heard that song, Greece is the word, it's the word that you heard. Okay, that's the word that he heard. Anyway, so he was supposed to go to Greece, and so he did. I wanted to throw that in there because that was a big point. I almost missed that one. All right. Why go to Macedonia? Well, because Philippi is there. That is a very strategic Roman colony. I'll show that to you in a minute. Also, Lydia was there. You need to know all about Lydia, her household. The Philippian church is there. But honestly, if it weren't for Paul going to Macedonia, would the church in Europe have ever been established the way that it was? Let's go on with this, because I need you to understand the place called Philippi. Where did the first church exist in Europe? Philippi. Philippi was the first church in Europe. Now, back then, it was not called Europe. By the way, so it was broken up into different provinces. You had Macedonia, which is Greece. You have Achaia, which is Corinth. You have Italia, which is Rome. Hispania, which was Spain. You had Gallia, which was France. Britannia, which is Britain. This is where Paul was going, but he was going to, first of all, to Macedonia. And the first place he's going to stop is in Philippi. So I want you to understand that over on the one side, I'm going to draw a line here. Notice the line I'm putting there. Asia is over on the one side and Europe is on the other. If you take where that line is, if you circle right around this little place right here, this is Turkey. This is Istanbul, Turkey, right here. I mentioned this just recently to you all. This was one time Constantinople, but this is the place where east meets west. So Paul left the east now to enter into the west, and he's going to this area called Philippi. Now, there's a huge influence of Romans that were there in Philippi. This was a strategic Roman colony. This is what Philippi looked like. Now, I'm sorry, this is what it looked like today. This is what it looks like today if you were to go there. Beautiful place. Nice green lush you can see there. You can see a theater. But mostly it's all in ruins now, the area of Philippi. But this is probably what it looked like for Paul back in the day. So ancient Philippi, it goes right up against the hill. A beautiful place, but this is a little miniature Rome, is what this was. So a lot of Roman influence, a lot of laws and culture that influenced this place. You get a lot of privileges. In fact, this would be a place, if you're a retiree from the military, where do you go to live? Philippi. A lot of people go there. Where do a lot of military go when they've retired in Colorado Springs and they want to live somewhere? Well, Monument. Monument's a big retirement area for military. Some of you know that because that's where you've set your roots, is right here. Well, because there's a lot of influence here with the military, and a lot of you have those ties. Well, it's the same thing for Philippi. This is where they would go. And if you can rub shoulders with the people that have an in with the military, you probably have some ties in with the empire. So Paul did not mind going here. This was a place of influence, a place of cultural influence. So where it was at, and there was a lot of leadership, and Roman leadership was there. The other thing about Philippi here was what was called the Via Egnatia. And over on part of the screen, I got a picture of what this looks like a little bit, but it goes all the way from Istanbul, all the way to the western edge of Greece. And this was called Via Egnatia. So Philippi was right on this major trade route. Paul liked to find these kinds of places because that's how the scripture and the gospel spreads. So if he can work together with people that are part of the military, and if he gets to know people of influence, he can actually really have an influence on the west, just like he had an influence on the east. So through the Via Egnatia. And the other thing about this is a lot of gold mines near Philippi. I don't know if you knew that or not, but a lot of gold mines, but it was a big trade route at the day. But Philippi, because of what Paul did by going there, that became the home of the first European churches. And where was the first European church? Again, right in Philippi. Now, they didn't look like this. The pictures I'm showing you now are some churches that you'll find there currently, like the monastery in Macedonia, the Macedonian Orthodox Diocese. You have various churches and lots of churches in the area. But where did it all start? Philippi. Through one specific person that really Paul had an influence on, and that was Lydia. If you think of Philippi, you should think of this woman named Lydia. Now, I put her in, thanks to AI, I was able to put her in purple clothes. So I appreciate it. So I actually created this picture of Lydia, and so here she is. She was the first European convert, or the first one from the West. Lydia was very influential, and you have to wonder, if it were for Lydia, would the church ever have gotten to Europe and spread as much as it did without Lydia's help? So let me tell you just a little bit about Lydia, because it talks about that right here in Acts 16. And here it says, on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the woman who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira. By the way, Thyatira, this is where she was from. Where's Thyatira? That's on the east. That's kind of the 7 churches of Revelation. That kind of area. That's where she was from. And her name was Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. And when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home, being Paul, Luke, and Timothy, and Silas. Come to my home, everyone. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come, stay at my house. And she persuaded us. Here we find something about Lydia here. She was persuasive. God used Lydia to help establish the very first church in the Europe area, and with her perseverance, with her sacrifice, she was willing to do that and invite them in. Now, she was a merchant of purple cloth from Thyatira. And I wanted to just mention here, do you know where purple used to come from? How they used to get purple? Purple actually came from these murex sea snails. And I guess it's very, very difficult to get out, but there's like a liquid inside these snails, because we have purple all the time now, but the way they used to get purple back then is they would actually extract it, I think out of their tails mostly, but even out of their bodies. It starts as a nice white liquid, and then it turns a really deep purple as it begins to dry. So then what you do is you take that liquid, and then that becomes a dye, and then you put that into the fabrics. And this is where the wealthy people would get the purple color. Purple is something that usually it was a thing of authority. Purple was not readily available. It was very hard to come by. But just by the fact that Lydia had access to this purple dye and dealing with murex sea snails, she was able to rub shoulders with the elite. And with that, and with the trade routes and everything else, this Christianity began to spread right through Lydia, and it all started right in her house. That's where your first European church started. Lydia's home. Pretty amazing. Amazing lady. So again, she was the first European convert to all of Christianity. I find that fascinating. So when Paul had this vision of going out there, I just want you to see a new church can begin just with Paul's sacrifice and also with Lydia's as well. Now, let me talk about the calling and the sacrifice. How is there sacrifice by Paul? Did you know that when Paul went to Philippi, it was not easy for him? He first of all had this slave girl. There was a demon-possessed slave girl that was a fortune teller, and there was a slave owner of this young lady, and this slave girl used to go and prophesy, saying, these are the prophets of the lead God, of the head God. And she kept screaming it out. It got actually annoying to Paul. He's like, these guys and these guys here, they're all part of the lead God. These are the main God followers. And she kept saying things like that. Anyway, Paul got annoyed with her over time. He says, okay, demon, get out of her. Well, if you're the owner of that slave girl and she's a fortune teller, and this owner of the girl is making a lot of money through this girl, he wasn't very happy. So anyway, Paul casts the demon out of the slave girl, and then he gets thrown in jail. He and Silas, they get beat up within an inch of their lives, and he's thrown into prison at Philippi. Now, I want to say to you, the book of Philippians this is not the time of the book of Philippians. That was later on. That's when Paul was in prison, probably in Rome, writing to Philippians. But this is a different time frame. But Paul, because of his willingness to go to Macedonia, and what he did, and also with Lydia and his influence, he got thrown in prison with Silas, and they were beat up bad. And that's one of my favorite stories, where Paul and Silas they're in prison, and they're singing a song. Hey, Silas, you got a tune? You got a tune? You want to sing something? Amazing how Paul did that. But he had to sacrifice. But look at what happened just because of Lydia and her household. They became believers, and it just continued to spread. So Christianity, because of this, expands to Europe, all from a call, a vision to help a man out in Macedonia. So here's going to ask this question. What if Alvin York, what if he had never done what he did with shooting the German soldiers? What it would have been like? Would World War I have lasted longer? Very possible. We don't know. We don't know for sure. But what if that happened? What if Pat Tillman wouldn't have left the NFL and gone into the military? What would have happened then? Also, what if Paul had not heeded the call? What if Paul said, no, I really want to keep working in Bithynia? What would have happened? So let's look at this. Because if Paul didn't answer that call, then you have no Lydia. If you don't have a Lydia, you have no gospel within her, and she continues to remain a seeker. She may never have been a believer. It's hard to say what God had in mind. What about her household? If Paul would never have listened to this call, she may have missed salvation. She may have stayed in darkness, and their whole household too. What about the Philippian church? The Philippian church may never have formed in Europe. Maybe it would have come eventually because God had plans in mind, but it may have never formed the way it did. And there would have been no epistle. There would have been no letter to the Philippians when Paul was in prison later. In Europe, the gospel may have been delayed. There's no slave girl deliverance. There's no jailer's conversion from the earthquake. A lot of things happened because of this. But this now goes down to our call to sacrifice. God calls us to sacrifice our time, our comfort, and our pride. When I left from trying to do this real estate program and coming to the church, there was a big sense of a loss of pride for me because I knew what I was doing. I had put all my efforts in this. It was about me. And here I'm going to go with a church that's just getting established. But this is where I needed to be. But if I ignored that, look at the missed opportunities I might have had. And look at the lost impact. I think the same thing happened with Paul. If he wouldn't have gone the way he did, there could have been lost opportunity and lost impact. It's kind of like those people that have served in our military. They have chosen to sacrifice, and because of that, there is incredible impact in all of our lives. My question is, you, like myself, may have been asked by God to do something. Have you ever felt that tug in your heart, like, I'm supposed to talk to somebody. I'm supposed to tell them about Jesus, or I'm supposed to go encourage this person, and you ignored it? Have any of you had that happen before? It's easy to, it's too much work. If I'm going to do this, I had a friend who is dying of cancer, and he felt, before I die, I need to go talk to this lady, and I really don't want to talk to her. This is something I've been needing to do this for a long time, and he says, I'm supposed to do this, but I don't feel like it. And you know something? He went and he talked with her. And afterwards, I asked him and said, Tracy, do you know why you were supposed to talk with her? Even because he did. He says, I have no idea, but I felt like this strong tug. Who knows how God was going to use that circumstance? But probably God moved upon her because God moved upon him. God calls us to sacrifice. Just like Paul, just like myself, just like Alvin, just like Pat, just like Paul, just like so many countless others that have sacrificed and answered the call to go. It's not easy, but it is a challenge that we must take. We need to sometimes identify ways that God has called us to sacrifice. And maybe, I'm not sure what that looks like for all of you. I'm not even sure what that looks like for me at times. But maybe that means for some of you to invite someone to church. You don't feel like doing it, but God's asking you to do it. Will you do it? Sometimes it just takes writing it down, figuring out an action plan, praying about it, and watching for an impact that can happen. Because we have, as we celebrate Memorial Day, we have people that have shown sacrifice, and our lives are changed because of it. Will you now sacrifice? What are we willing to do? Just like the people who sacrificed for our country. What are we willing to do, like Paul? Is there some way that you can sacrifice in ways that you've never thought of before? But let God move it upon your heart. And I want you to listen to that still small voice. And today, when we close today, we're going to remember the people that have done that very thing, that have sacrificed their lives. So I'm going to ask you to listen to the call for God to move upon you to sacrifice in the only way that you know with God. He may speak to you in a different way, but listen, he's calling. Will you respond? Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the men and women who have sacrificed. Today, Lord, if it weren't for Paul listening to that vision, Europe may never have been converted. And if Europe may not have been converted, would it even have come to the United States of America? Lord, can we truly trace where we're at today with even the fellowship of Christ all the way back to the call of the Macedonian man? Amazing. God, it's through people who have sacrificed and shown love and courage and care. God, may we be those kinds of people as well. We first of all honor those people that have gone before us. And second, Lord, we ask that you would use us. Use us mightily for your glory. We thank you for being our God and the author and the finisher of faith, the one true God who sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross. Talk about sacrifice, Lord. I thank you for the death of your Son, Jesus Christ. I pray this, Lord, in your precious name. Amen.